Well, I mean, if you look at the Prime Minister's appeal in a way, I look upon that as a kind of very serious conversation with the people of India, where he have identified a few areas and without creating any kind of alarm or panic, I think the we have to look at the oil landscape as a whole, or oil and gas landscape as a whole. We are heavily dependent on imports. We import roughly 90% of our total requirement of oil from different geographies, about 42 different countries in practically all continents across the world. And since the Persian Gulf War, we have seen a massive disruption in supply. On the one hand, the prices have gone up, and at the same time, we have seen that there is a kind of serious disruption in both oil and gas, even fertilizer for that matter. I mean, reports say that there's 20% disruption in the sense that the Strait of Hormuz, deals with about 20% of the global oil trade and natural gas trade. However, when we look at Asian economies like India and China, Japan and Korea, our dependence on the Middle East or the Persian Gulf is much higher than 20%. Since oil flows have more or less stopped from that region into India, or for that matter into other Asian economies, I mean, the pain is there for everybody to see. In such a situation, so far, government and our public sector companies and our refiners and our private sector companies, they have shielded the Indian economy, the Indian consumer, both domestic consumer and industrial consumers from, the kind of situation that we are into. However, now it looks like, and I think that's probably is also the reading of the government of India, that this is not going to end soon. The war probably is not going to end soon. Even if it ends soon, probably the effect of it, the impact of it on oil flows, the gas flows, and economies as a whole is going to last much longer, maybe for another several months to come. So I think the idea is basically to prepare the Indian people for that situation. And therefore, at the same time, as I said, we depend heavily on imports for our oil. And oil is the backbone of Indian economy. For that matter, oil is the backbone of global economy also. Since oil is so important, it's like a backbone to our economy. It's important that, we do whatever we need to do in order, on the one hand, reduce our dependence on oil for the time being, or unless situation is back to normal. And at the same time, conserve to the extent possible, so that we can reduce our dependence on imports, and therefore we can also save our hard-earned foreign currency. Since the prices have gone up of oil, so therefore outflow of foreign currency for buying oil has really gone through the roof. So overall, I think I understand. I think the government shielded the Indian economy, the Indian consumer, especially the vulnerable sections of Indian society, to the extent the government could. But now we have reached the situation, the very same companies that have the company which have gone mandate to go all over the world, secure oil for Indian economy, for Indian consumer, like oil and gas and LPG. The same companies are now in trouble, in the sense they are bleeding, they are suffering heavy losses, under recoveries, and so on and so forth. So since we depend on these companies, both public sector and private sector, to go out and bring oil into India, refine it, process it, distribute it, it's important that the economic health and the financial health of these companies remain in good shape. Otherwise, how are these companies going to perform their job? The mandate they have to go out and bring oil for the Indian economy from all over the world, I mean, it's not a small thing. So therefore, I think the message is that, we are in a situation where we don't create any panic. At the same time, we make sure oil is available for our, domestic consumers, industrial consumers, for our economy. At the same time, we make sure our companies, which are responsible for bringing oil into India, whether public sector or the private sector, they remain in good financial health, so that they are strong enough to go out and bring oil for our requirement, for our needs. So I think so it's a kind of cutting the right balance. On the one hand is having engagement, conversation with the Indian consumer, at the same time having consumer conversation with Indian companies. And the fact that this statement has come from the Prime Minister on the eve of his visit to the Middle East, to Abu Dhabi, United Arab Emirates, which is a major supplier of oil to India. for that matter, the whole world. So I think there is a kind of message to these countries also, the major exporter of oil. So I think it's very understandable. It's not something that is going to last forever. But right now we are in a situation which has been in a way enforced on us. We didn't create the war. War has been something America, Israel, and Iran, they are responsible for it. But we have to deal with the consequences. So to the extent possible, government shielded. But now I think it's very clear the government thinks that it's important to have an open conversation, honest conversation with the nation, and really put things across in this way that we can continue to serve the economy. But at the same time, it's important to explain that look, this is what the situation is, and and it may go on like this for a long period of time. And we may start with this conversation, but tomorrow, if necessary, we may have to increase the price of petrol and diesel, and for that matter, even LNG, and who knows, even fertilizer. So I think it's just the beginning of a kind of measures that the government might be taking in time to come. So my own sense is we're going to see a hike in oil and petrol and diesel prices in coming weeks. Not a very steep hike, but I think these companies are going to pass on part of the burden to the Indian consumer. And maybe the government may also go for some kind of further rationalization of taxes, especially in excise. Maybe state governments will also be persuaded to do something in that direction to cut their taxes. So I think it's basically preparing the nation for this. But at this stage, I mean, as the petroleum secretary, I also said that we don't need to press the panic button. But the thing is, when you look at the horizon, especially the oil horizon globally, is important for us since we are so heavily dependent on imports. I think the government is preparing the public for that.